George Washington, the First American President, A Tale of a Hero and His Journey, by Chase Madorsky. In 1775, English and American forces exchanged fire at Lexington and Concord. The American Revolutionary War for Independence had begun, as well as Washington's call to adventure. With the outbreak of war, the American Continental Army needed a commander. Yet Washington did not let ambition trump honesty by actively seeking the post. This is Washington's refusal to call within his hero's journey. Although not actively seeking the title, Washington still dreamed of leading the Continental Army. Washington's dreams provided him supernatural aid that, along with his military past, led him to present himself to the Second Continental Congress in a full military uniform in order to signify his preparation for battle. Once the Second Continental Congress was in agreement, Washington was named Commander-in-Chief of the American Continental Forces. After packing his belongings and leaving his Mount Vernon estate for war, Washington had crossed the first threshold of his quest. Washington immediately headed to Boston, where he was faced with the task of organizing and training his army into an efficient fighting force. Boston signified Washington's induction into the belly of the whale of the war. Along the road of trials, Washington faced many early tests throughout his run as general. British forces soundly handed him defeat at the Battle of Long Island, and his army's numbers were greatly threatened due to the expiration of many American soldiers' enlistments following one full calendar year. At the end of that road, however, was hope, as upon defeating British General Howe in the Battle of Saratoga in 1777, Washington met his goddess in the form of French King Louis XVI, who had the power to change Washington's fate by introducing France to fight alongside Washington against the British forces, which he later would go on to do, changing the direction of the Revolutionary War. Many temptations could have led Washington to stray from the war cause, including the deaths of many of his American soldier contemporaries and the harsh winter of 1777 to 1778 spent at Valley Forge. Temptations would soon give way to atonement with the Father, as Washington would go on to meet the man with ultimate power in his life, Baron von Steuben, who would go on to train the American Continental Army into a more strong and efficient army force than the British had expected nor the Americans expected to become. By witnessing the death of the American soldiers he led all around him at the hands of the British redcoat enemy, Washington underwent a stage of apotheosis. The ultimate boon in Washington's journey occurred in 1783 upon defeating British General Cornwallis in the Battle of York. Following the battle, the Treaty of Paris was signed between American and British forces, effectively ending the Revolutionary War in the favor of America and reaching the goal of American independence. After exploring the West and returning home to Mount Vernon for 3 years post-war, Washington was rescued from without by the Constitutional Convention, for which he headed to Philadelphia for in 1787 with the goal of a United States Constitution in mind.
Do you know about the government?
While crossing the return threshold through the Constitutional Convention, Washington retained the wisdom that he learned in both being a general of the American Army as well as his youth, and shared this to the entire world through his contributions to the Constitution of the United States of America, which he figureheaded the convention to establish.
Did agree to write a list of...
Following the Constitutional Convention, George Washington was elected by the Electoral College as the first President of the United States of America in 1788 and took office in 1789, making him the master of two worlds, the battlefield and the political world in America.
Did out the things that we should be.
As President of the United States of America, Washington did not have to answer to anybody above him, allowing him to have the freedom to live in the moment and do what he wanted whenever he wanted to do so as his own choosing. The title of the book that I read in order to complete this hero project was George Washington, Great Lies Observed, edited by Morden Borden, which was a collection of diary entries and first-hand primary sources recollecting the life of George Washington based on personal opinions and thoughts and theories. I chose this book in order to help me research the tale of George Washington's journey through being a hero, because through primary sources such as diary entries and journals written firsthand by George Washington and contemporaries of his time, I was able to see how people truly felt about George Washington, as well as get into the mind of George Washington himself while on his tale of being a hero and becoming one of the most famous people in American history. When considering American heroes throughout history, George Washington must be near the top of that list. Washington's acts in the Revolutionary War included leading an army that few thought could actually defeat the British and soundly defeating them, gaining America independence. George Washington later took over America in a time of turmoil as the country was undecided where they would go following the Revolutionary War, and he guided them as their first president into prosperity going forward into the future, into what America is today. George Washington, for these reasons, is a hero.